From the queen who burned down an entire town using birds to the woman who became possibly the world's most prolific serial killer, today we have a show for you about the darkness that can eclipse a person's life once they're put into a position of power. Number 12. Let's start with a story of eye gouging because every ancient tale of kings and queens should include someone getting their eyes torn out. This queen in question was Irene of Athens. She was born sometime around the year 750. We don't know too much about her early days, but we do know she came from a family that could greatly influence politics. That meant she was always destined to be involved in all that violent malarkey that came with politics back then. It seems as though she might have been an orphan who was adopted into this family, with the head of the family being a guy named Constantine Sarantapechos. He was either her uncle or cousin, but what's important is that he was a patrician, a part of the ruling class in the great city of Athens. Irene ended up getting hitched the son of Byzantine ruler Emperor Constantine V. This son, Leo, might have picked her from a bride show. Irene was apparently easy on the eyes. In short, they had a son, and then when the emperor died, Leo became the new emperor. That made Irene the empress. So things were now looking fine and dandy for Irene, although things were never really fine in the Byzantine royal backrooms. That was where all the talk of skullduggery took place, and it's where people spread vicious rumors after Irene's Leo kicked the bucket. She was made regent, and her son, now 9, was in a precarious position of being so young and there being so many people from the family thinking they should be the next emperor. This young boy might have been a kind of emperor, but a lot of powerful people didn't think that that was right. This was a tricky time for Irene, so she did what any queen would do and called in for some backup. That backup was mainly a bunch of Byzantine-era special forces called the excubators. It seems she got busy banishing folks from the city of Constantinople, and she might have also had the whip brought out now and again for anyone thinking about making a fuss in the royal court. If you were loyal to Irene, you stayed. If you were not loyal, you were banished or whipped until you had a change of mind. But it seems as a regent, she was quite power-hungry, loving to see her face on coins, which was normally a privilege reserved for the emperor. Let's remember here that being a female regent wasn't easy. There were just too many people who wanted you dead. Take, for instance, Empress Martina. Martina was the last woman to become regent prior to Irene, and guess what happened to her? After about 1 year in the big seat, she was accused of poisoning folks and being power-hungry. So they cut out her tongue. Her sons were then paraded in front of her and their noses were cut off. Her youngest sons were castrated, and then the lot of them were banished to a small island. Make no mistake, Irene knew all about that story. She ruled well, making just the right friendships, but her son started getting a little bit peeved with her as he turned into a man. This ended with an open rebellion, but Irene came out on top and it seems she forgave her son at first. He tried to topple her again and again he failed, this time running away to the provinces. But Irene's army caught up with him and dragged him back to the palace. He pleaded with his mother, but she was having none of it. She told her men to rip out his eyes, which they did, leaving the young man screaming on the floor. He might have actually not survived the ordeal. Losing your eyes or nose in those days was serious business, given that they had no skilled surgeons, as we do now, or medication for infections. So was Irene a brutal ruler? Well, let's be honest, she was almost always surrounded by potential enemies. We know that a mother watching on as her son's eyes are ripped out is what you might call a tad brutal. But back then, it wasn't all that strange. Irene was deposed after a while and sent to an island where she lived on for about 1 year and then died. She apparently became a wool spinner during that last year, which is quite a fall for a former queen. She was now probably in her mid to late 40s at the time of her death. Alright, now for someone downright crazy, and we mean that in the maniac sense of the word. Number 11. Maria Eleonora is such a wonderful sounding name, but Maria the monster also has a ring to it. Her story starts at the beginning of the 17th century, when the King of Sweden Gustavus Adolphus was looking for a wife. One day he'd become an accomplished military leader, but in his early 20s he did what his mother told him. He actually wanted to marry a woman named Ebba Brahe, but his mother wouldn't allow that. They still wrote to each other often, but it seems nothing really came of the relationship. Then the king got wind of a 17-year-old girl who many said was the most beautiful person around. This was Maria Eleonora. They eventually married, although it said Maria could have gotten married to any number of rich and powerful men, including the King of England. She was generally well liked by most people, although historians say she liked to party a bit too much. Her favorite pastime was watching shows which consisted of actors who had severe mental problems. She also loved shows where the actors had dwarfism, so in general she liked mocking people who were, let's say, just a bit different from her. Then something went wrong. She had a miscarriage and it seems this sent her over the edge. She walked around using foul language, screaming at anyone close by using the most obscene words. She also became paranoid and violent, which is never a good mix. She later had a child, and that kid died after about 1 year. Remember that the king needed a son too, but most of the time he was risking life and limb in battles. That could mean no male heir if he died while fighting, and this put a lot of pressure on Maria. Then they finally had a baby girl, although Maria was horrified at what she saw. The baby, to be named Christina, had certain genetic condition, which meant she was covered in hair. Having a baby that resembled Bigfoot seemed to have finally sent her fully over the edge. Her first words when the baby was handed to her were, "Instead of a son, I'm given a daughter, dark and ugly, with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me. I will not have such a monster." She had good moments, but many bad ones. She got pregnant again with a bump in her stomach and had a boating accident. Then she shouted to her friends, "Jesus, I cannot feel my child." This became yet another miscarriage. She really wanted a baby boy, of course, but what she ended up with was a girl that she'd hated from day one. It's suspicious then that Christina kept having strange accidents throughout her young life, like falling down the stairs multiple times, which was probably her tumbling down after being pushed by her mom. So while her husband was away fighting wars, she was at home torturing her kid. On various occasions, Christina should have died in those accidents, so we're going to call that attempted murder. Then, when Christina was 7, her father died. Guess who Maria blamed for the death? She blamed the daughter she so much detested. For about 1 year, Maria forced Christina to stay in a dark room alone. There were candles, but Maria expressly told the servants that not one beam of light should enter that room. But here's the kicker. For a while, the dead body of the king was placed in an open casket on the bed, and Maria told Christina she had to sleep next to it. Yes, she had completely lost the plot, so much so that she had Christina taken away from her. She was the mother from hell, although we think she had some serious mental health issues. Alright, now for arguably the most hated queen of all time. Number 10. This is the story of Marie Antoinette. A beautiful and cruel queen is living the high life in France where countless people are starving to death. Life is so unfair and unequal that one of the greatest revolutions is about to happen, and it's going to lead to a lot of rich folks losing their heads. When we say that living standards were unequal, we're talking about the obscene wealth of people living in lavishly opulent 50-bedroom country houses and poor people who could not even afford a piece of bread each day. As a certain story goes, one day in 1789, a servant was brushing the queen's hair when someone came into the room and announced something along the lines of, "Your Majesty, the harvest has been a terrible one and people are dying from famine. There is no bread to eat." Marie replied, "Let them eat cake." She was so out of touch with reality that she really thought her people could eat all the expensive cakes. Historians tell us she never actually said that, or probably didn't. The story might have been told time and again just to show how selfish the nobility was. Marie spent money on unbelievable luxuries when the people of France could not eat, and she was taking money from public funds. It didn't help her case that she was also said to be a bit of a libertine. So when she appeared in the Place de Révolution on her execution day, you can bet that it was a huge celebration. She was without a doubt the most hated woman in France. At about 12:15 p.m., her head was placed on the block of a guillotine and whoosh, the queen was dead. Was she really all that brutal? Maybe not so much compared to the other women you'll hear about today, but let's be honest, to enjoy living in insane luxury while not caring about all the mass death from starvation going on around you isn't exactly a nice thing. Alright, let's now talk about one of history's most infamous serial killers. Number 9. Her name was Elizabeth Bathory, and while she was a countess and not a queen, her story is too outstanding to not include on this list. Records show that this woman was almost inhuman in regard to her utter sadism that she inflicted on people. For one, she seemed to have hated her servants, and she would torture and kill them over the smallest matters. She even had a special torture room built for her brutal daily activities. In the late 1500s and early 1600s, she used her power to lure peasants back to her abode. She preferred good-looking young women, whose blood she thought would help her retain her beauty in old age. She would sometimes tear at the woman with her teeth like a savage animal. But after hundreds of peasants had died, some people became suspicious, especially as it was getting harder to get rid of the dead bodies. Bathory got older and became convinced that drinking her victims' blood wasn't working. So she told her servants to go out, find her women and girls with noble blood. These were hard to come by, so her servants ended up dressing peasants in fine clothes and telling them they had to pretend to be noble. To cut a long story short, the authorities were finally pushed into starting an investigation, even if Bathory was supremely powerful. They ended up finding mutilated bodies around her massive house, including folks who'd obviously been chewed on by Bathory. As you can imagine, this became a great scandal. About 300 people came forward and explained just how sadistic Bathory was, and how one day they'd sent their children to see her and the child never came back. The servants who helped Bathory pick up the victims were all beheaded, but Bathory, being so rich, was just told she'd have to spend the rest of her life locked in a rather luxurious castle. We'll never know the exact number of her victims, but it could have been as many as 650. Let's now head over to Asia. Number 8. Wu Zetian was a Chinese woman who historians have from time to time called a tyrant ruler. Born on February 17, 624, for a time she took over what was known as the Tang Dynasty. She might have had some tyrannical leanings, but back in those days, getting blood on your hands was part and parcel of being a ruler. It must be said, though, that she lessened corruption and was behind some positive economic reforms. She was a good leader, in some respects. It was what she did to get power that you could call a little bit sketchy. For instance, when she was just starting out, she joined the harem of Emperor Gaozong. Once there, she went about killing the others in the harem to ensure that one day she would become the empress. Some historians have written that to stay in power, she was absolutely ruthless. She might have even murdered 2 of her own children, although that's still up for debate. It should be said that this particular rumor surfaced long after she died. Then, after she had secured her position, she kept it by coming down hard on anyone that criticized her. Some of those that did were either sent to exile or executed. It seems this kind of thing went on all throughout her life, although as we said, in those days, in general, could be brutal. Next up is another person who seems to have lost her mind. Number 7. Her name was Maria I, known for being the first queen of Portugal and often called Maria the Pious there. But in Brazil, a country where she was also the monarch, she got the name Maria the Mad. She was the eldest daughter of King Dom José. When he passed away in 1777, Maria took the throne. She had a husband who became the king, King Dom Pedro III. But it was her who was the lineal heir to the throne, and so she wielded all the power. It seems at the start she did a pretty good job, but something wasn't quite right in her mind, and she often suffered from debilitating bouts of melancholia. When those came on, she would often become delirious and then end up having to be carried home. Her husband died, and let's just say things didn't get much better for her after that. Like the Roman Emperor Caligula had once done after the death of his sister, Maria made sure everyone under her mourned for this great man. She made life miserable for normal people because of her own loss, not allowing regular festivities to take place. But she wasn't only a party pooper. It wasn't long until she couldn't rule at all and spent much of her time alone in her room. This was a place from where people would often hear wild screams. She was later taken to Brazil, but things didn't get any better there. She spent all of her time alone in bed, half mad, hence that's why Brazil called her Maria the Mad. She stayed like that until she died in 1816. So while Maria might not have been the most brutal woman on this list, she was certainly a terrible queen once her madness kicked in. This next queen was much, much worse. Number 6. Her name was Queen Ranavalona I, and she ruled Madagascar between 1828 and 1861. Once her husband had kicked the bucket, she took over, and she became known as an avid isolationist who spent much of her time keeping European colonists at bay, something which made European powers quite displeased. Many of the horror stories about this queen came from European explorers in the region, so we must take everything written about her with a slight pinch of salt. Still, we know for sure that she amassed a great army, but she didn't ensure that they were fed well. Its center forces died wholesale from general ill health, forced labor, and also starvation. If you were against her, she'd put you through what we now call a trial by ordeal, meaning she'd find out someone's innocence or guilt by making them endure some terrible sadistic torture. With so many of her soldiers dying and so many civilians also becoming ill and dying, the population of Madagascar pretty much halved. So that's certainly a black mark against her name. But she also came down hard on Christians, sometimes putting them through these trials of ordeals after accusing them of some kind of witchcraft. It was this widespread oppression of people that made some historians call her a tyrant ruler, although other academics have said some of her misdeeds were exaggerated. One of those misdeeds, which may or may not be true, was her starving her own mother to death. This next lady on the list wins for just being plain weird. Number 5. Her name was Juana la Loca, and she was the Queen of Castile from 1504 to 1516. It seems at the start of her reign she didn't do much ruling at all. She was confined for much of it as she was deemed unfit to rule, so without any real power we can't really blame her for any special brutalities. But it was because of her and her family arguing about who would rule that led the country to falling into disorder. This was really bad news for much of the poor population who died in famines or from the plague. It's thought half the people of Castile died during these horrific years. Things didn't get any better as she got older, and it's said she lost her mind thinking everyone was out to get her, including some nuns who were only trying to take care of her. She would barely eat, and she refused to wash or change her clothes. There is some chance she might have suffered from a severe mental condition such as schizophrenia, but there's also a chance that many of the people who contended with her for power say this about her so they could say she was not fit to rule. Some of the stories they told, which could have been true, included her going back again and again to her husband's dead coffin and asking for it to be opened. She would then stroke the dead body and kiss his very cold feet. There are also rumors that when she traveled, the coffin and its occupant went with her, asking for it to be placed under her bed. If you want to know what made her that crazy, just look at her mother. Number 4. That was Isabella I of Castile. She ruled Spain at the side of King Ferdinand II from 1451 through 1504. a period of time that saw the start of the notorious Spanish Inquisition. We cannot place all the blame on her for kicking off this ghastly time in history, but she played a really big part in it. Isabella was the one who created the formal mass expulsion decree, leading to the expulsion of Jews and Muslims as well as mass torture of whoever she thought threatened her position. That itself would be enough to label someone a little bit brutal. But it gets worse. Many of those people who weren't expelled had to face the music of the investigations, which we call the Inquisition. This often included being tortured, and the woman we just talked about, Juana, grew up watching her mother order such tortures. In fact, it's said that because Juana's faith didn't seem strong enough, sometimes Isabella would suspend her from ropes, and to cause excessive pain, she would add weights to her limbs. By all accounts, Juana was just as skeptical about faith, but for Isabella, that was about as bad as it gets for a child. We imagine this next monarch would have done something similar given the chance. Number 3. She was Princess Olga of Kiev, and she was a monarch in the 900s in what is present-day Ukraine. Her husband Igor of Kiev died in 945 at the hands of a tribe called the Drevlians. It's totally understandable that Olga would be a bit peeved about losing her husband, but it's the brutality of what she did next that really makes her stand out. The Drevlians told her that the best thing to do would be for her to marry one of their own. They sent many ambassadors to her with this proposition, and she had them all buried alive. She even bent down as they were struggling to breathe and said something along the lines of, "How's this for a reply?" Olga later had some of the higher-ranking Drevlians invited to a great party at her house, which was perceived as a sign of goodwill and forgiveness. It wasn't. She invited them into the bathhouse and then had the doors locked and ordered the place burned to the ground. Later, she and her men massacred thousands of Drevlians in one attack alone. The people that were left barricaded the city and a siege ensued. Months passed and the people inside were starving, but then Olga got the idea to send in birds with burning cloth attached to their feet. The birds did their job and landed on the wooden houses and burned them down. Anyone seen running from the town was executed on the spot. So, this was about as hardcore as it gets in the realms of revenge. Olga was a badass without a doubt. She also was about converting people to Christianity, and so she was later canonized as a saint of the Orthodox Church. The next lady was not quite so heroic. She was just as bad to the bone. Number 2. She was known as Fredegund and was the queen consort to King Chilperic I, who was part of a dynasty within the Frankish kingdom, which encompassed most of modern-day France and parts of western Germany. Her rule stretched from 584 to 597, and according to the few historians that wrote about her, it was a bloody career she had. What was written creates a picture of a woman who at times could be one very mean, murderous sadist. As the story goes, she wasn't born into any kind of highly influential royal family, but the king took a special liking to her from a young age. He didn't marry her though, and instead married a woman named Galswintha. It seemed that Fredegund didn't much like this, and she either convinced the king that Galswintha needed to die, or she just went about killing her by herself. Whatever happened, Fredegund was partly behind Galswintha being strangled to death. Fredegund then began a decades-long conflict with Galswintha's sister Brunhilde. The latter married Sigebert I of Austrasia, and it seems that it was Fredegund who ordered his assassination. She also might have ordered the assassination of one of his sons, but that one didn't work out. There were other successful assassinations, though, of people who had gotten on the wrong side of Fredegund for various perceived transgressions. She even hated her own daughter, Rigunth, and that's because once the daughter grew up and became attractive, she told Fredegund that she should be part of the consort of the king instead of her mother. The Roman historian Gregory of Tours said this happened next. Fredegund waited for her opportunity, and under the pretense of magnanimity, took her to the treasure room and showed her the king's jewels in a large chest. Feigning fatigue, she exclaimed, "I am weary. Put thou in thy hand, and take out what thou mayest find." The mother thereupon forced down the lid on her neck and would have killed her had not the servants finally rushed to her aid. So yes, this was a brutal woman if there ever was one. Now let's talk about a woman with way more blood on her hands. Number 1. Her name was Mary I of England, and she ruled over England and Ireland from 1553 to 1558. There's a kind of giveaway as to her brutality with the name she acquired. That was Bloody Mary, but this had nothing to do with the spicy cocktail that people often drink. During Mary's short reign, she went to great lengths to reverse England's split with the Catholic Church. This was known as the English Reformation and was started by that well-known killer of wives, King Henry VIII. It's a long and complicated story, but all you need to know is that once she rose to power, she went about releasing some of the main Catholics in England that had been previously imprisoned. It was now payback time, and there was a hell of a lot of reformers that Mary took aim at. She's known for something called the Marian persecutions, which in short meant going after Protestants. Some went into exile, while others were captured, tortured, and burned at the stake. This didn't just include high-level clergy, but a lot of normal folks too, which included women and children. During the torture, some of them might have been asked to renounce their faith, but in the end, as many as 300 folks were burned at the stake. About 30 people also just died in prison while waiting. Of course, there were many powerful players at the time, and we can't blame all the carnage on Mary alone, but it's a fact that all those people died in horrific circumstances under her rule. She did at least once say, "None may be burnt without some of the council's presence and good sermons at the same." You'd be right to think that a lot of scared people wanted to overthrow this bloody queen, which at times ended with rebellions. One of them was called the Wyatt Rebellion and involved a lot of powerful people in England. These people had not wanted Mary to marry Philip of Spain, but it's likely they just wanted to get rid of her in general. Mary might not have done the torturing herself, but what happened to some of those rebels before their execution was terrible. In order to spill the beans about other rebels, some of them had to live through horrific torture methods such as being stretched on the rack. Once they'd talked or not talked, most were burnt at the stake, with the unfortunate ones being hanged, drawn, and quartered. This consisted of hanging them while making sure they didn't die. Their guts would then be ripped out and their bodies chopped into quarters. The head was usually saved and stuck on a pike someplace to remind people of what happens when you start thinking about rebelling. Some historians put the number of deaths in this rebellion at 200, although a more conservative estimate is 100. When people were burned en masse, historians write that the air would be full of the smell of burning flesh. That was about to happen on November 17, 1558, when a bunch of Protestants were lined up. As they were preparing themselves to be burned, suddenly everything went quiet. That's because someone stopped the process and handed in a letter saying the Queen is dead. British law made it that now these people couldn't legally be executed. So was Mary any worse than other European leaders that executed scores of folks back then simply because of their faith? Maybe not. Her half-sister, Elizabeth I, would also execute people for the same reason once she was sitting on the throne. Still, in the carnage that happened during this period of time in that part of the world, it's the name Bloody Mary that seems to stand out the most. Now you need to watch Most Evil Monarchs in the History of Mankind, or have a look at this.